It started with a name, just a single name that no one else seemed to remember. I was 3 weeks into my internship at Brightspark Marketing, a bustling agency where everyone hustled between meetings, coffee runs, and endless brainstorming sessions. That's when I noticed something strange. Claire Harper, an account manager who had been sitting 2 desks away from mine, hadn't shown up for work in days. At first, I thought maybe she was sick or had taken some personal time off. But as the days stretched into a week, her absence became harder to ignore. What really unsettled me was how no one else seemed to notice, or if they did, they weren't saying anything. When I asked around casually, people gave vague responses, like, oh, she must be busy, or maybe she switched teams. Even her desk remained untouched, as though frozen in time. Her laptop sat closed, her chair pushed neatly under the table, and a half-empty water bottle still lingered on the edge of her workspace. It was eerie, like she'd simply vanished without a trace. And yet, whenever I tried to press further, colleagues changed the subject quickly, their eyes darting away as if avoiding something uncomfortable. Then came the moment that made my blood run cold. While organizing files in the shared drive one evening, I stumbled across what looked like deliberate tampering. Every mention of Claire Harper had been meticulously erased, emails deleted, project contributions reassigned to others, even photos of team events edited to remove her face. Someone within the company had gone out of their way to make her disappear not just physically, but completely. The question was why, and more importantly, who? I couldn't let it go. The more I thought about Claire's disappearance, the more it gnawed at me. Who was she? And why had everyone acted as though her existence never mattered? Late that night, while most of the office was empty, I decided to dig deeper. Using my access as an intern, which no one seemed to monitor, I searched through archived folders and old employee records. It wasn't easy. Whoever had erased her had done a thorough job. But after hours of sifting through fragmented files, I found something. A single email thread between Claire and someone named R. Caldwell. The subject line read, "You know too much." The message itself was cryptic, filled with vague warnings about staying quiet and letting things lie. One particular sentence stood out. "If you keep pushing, they'll make sure you're gone, not just from here, but everywhere." My hands trembled as I scrolled further, discovering attachments labeled Project Ecliptica. They were encrypted, but even their titles hinted at something sinister. Terms like data breaches, blackmail lists, and corporate cover-ups. Whatever Claire had uncovered, it was big enough to get her erased entirely. As I sat there staring at the screen, a chilling realization hit me. If anyone found out I'd seen this, I might be next. Panic set in as I quickly closed the files and deleted my search history, but deep down I knew it wasn't enough. Whoever had erased Claire likely monitored every keystroke, every access log. Paranoia crept into my mind like a shadow. Was someone watching me right now? I glanced over my shoulder at the darkened office, half expecting to see a figure standing there. Instead, all I saw were rows of empty desks bathed in the cold glow of my computer screen. Still, the feeling lingered. I was being watched. The next morning, things got worse. As I entered the office, several colleagues greeted me with forced smiles that didn't reach their eyes. One senior manager even stopped by my desk casually, asking if I'd found anything interesting during my late-night work sessions. His tone was light, almost playful, but his gaze was sharp, probing. It was clear he knew or suspected what I'd been doing. By lunchtime, I noticed subtle changes around me. My login credentials no longer worked on certain systems, and when I tried to revisit the shared drive where I'd uncovered Claire's emails, entire folders had disappeared overnight. Someone was covering their tracks again, and this time they were sending me a message, back off or else. That evening, as I packed up to leave, I found a plain manila envelope slipped under my keyboard. My heart raced as I opened it, revealing a single photograph inside. It was Claire, smiling warmly at a company picnic, but someone had drawn a red X over her face in thick marker. On the back of the photo, a short note was scrawled, "Forget what you saw. For your own sake." My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just a warning, it was a threat. Whoever had erased Claire wasn't going to stop with her. They'd do whatever it took to protect their secrets. I quit the internship the very next day, citing personal reasons no one bothered to question. But leaving didn't bring peace. Even now, months later, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being followed, watched by unseen eyes wherever I go. Every email notification makes me flinch. Every unfamiliar voice on the phone sends chills down my spine. Claire's name still haunts me, a ghost erased from existence but never truly gone. Sometimes late at night I wonder if I made the right choice in walking away, or if I should have kept digging, risking everything to expose the truth. But deep down I know the answer. Some secrets are buried for a reason, and uncovering them comes at a cost too high to pay. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. I'd been working late shifts at Carter's Auto Repair for about a month when I first noticed something off about one of the senior mechanics, a guy named Vince. He was older, with weathered hands and a voice like gravel, the kind of person who commanded respect without asking for it. At first he seemed harmless enough, gruff but helpful, always quick to offer advice or show me the ropes. But then came the comments. One night, as I was closing up the shop, Vince leaned against the workbench beside me, wiping grease from his fingers with a rag. "You live over on Maple Street, right?" he asked casually, though there was an edge to his tone that made my stomach tighten. I nodded hesitantly, unsure how he knew where I lived. I'd never mentioned it at work. "Quiet neighborhood," he continued, his lips curling into a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Bet you're glad to have those tall hedges. Out front, keeps prying eyes away." At the time I brushed it off as small talk, maybe even coincidence. After all, Maple Street wasn't exactly uncommon around here. But the next week, things escalated. As I clocked out after another long shift, Vince appeared behind me holding up my phone, which I hadn't realized I'd left on the counter earlier. "Forgot this," he said, tossing it to me. Then with a smirk, he added, "Looks like you've got some interesting photos saved. That girlfriend of yours sure likes sunsets." My blood ran cold. The photo gallery on my phone was locked. No one should have been able to see those pictures. And yet Vince spoke as though he'd scrolled through them himself. I started to feel uneasy around Vince after that, but avoiding him was easier said than done. He had a way of showing up, when I least expected it, lingering near my workstation, offering unsolicited advice or just standing close enough to make me uncomfortable. One evening, while I was organizing tools in the garage, he sidled up beside me and said, almost casually, "You know, accidents happen all the time, especially late at night." His words hung in the air like smoke, heavy and suffocating. When I turned to look at him, his expression was unreadable, his eyes glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Be careful out there, kid," he added before walking away, leaving me frozen in place. That was when paranoia began to creep in. Every noise outside the shop window made me jump. Every shadow on my walk home felt like someone following me. I tried convincing myself that Vince was just messing with my head, that maybe he'd seen my address on some paperwork or guessed about my girlfriend based on random details. But deep down, I knew it wasn't normal. How could he have accessed my phone? Why did he seem so interested in my personal life? The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Vince wasn't just curious, he was watching me, and possibly worse. The breaking point came one rainy Thursday night. I was alone in the shop, finishing up an oil change for a car that had been dropped off earlier. The overhead lights flickered intermittently, casting the garage in uneven shadows. As I bent over to tighten the last bolt, I heard footsteps approaching, slow, deliberate and far too loud to be my imagination. When I straightened up, Vince was standing there, arms crossed, his silhouette blocking the light from the doorway. "Still here, huh?" he said, his tone deceptively casual. But this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him stood two other mechanics, guys, who usually kept to themselves, but now wore matching smirks that mirrored Vince's unsettling grin. "You've got potential," Vince continued, taking a step closer. "But you're not careful enough." He gestured toward the clock on the wall, though it wasn't even midnight yet. "People notice things when they shouldn't, like how often you glance at your phone or how jumpy you've been lately." My pulse quickened as his words sank in. They weren't just threats, they were warnings. Somehow Vince knew more than he should, and worse, he wasn't afraid to use that knowledge against me. For the first time since starting at the shop, I realized I might not make it out of this shift unscathed. Before I could respond, Vince reached into his pocket and pulled out a small USB drive, holding it up between his thumb and forefinger like bait. "This belongs to you, doesn't it?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. My stomach dropped. There was no way he could have known about that drive. It contained backups of personal files, including sensitive documents I'd saved months ago without thinking twice. I thought it had been safely tucked away in my locker. Until now. "Listen carefully," Vince said, his voice low and steady, each word landing like a hammer blow. "You don't want whatever's on this getting out, and neither do I. So, here's what's going to happen. You'll stop asking questions, stop acting skittish, and stay out of things that don't concern you." "If you don't?" He let the sentence hang, slipping the USB back into his pocket as he turned to leave. The other mechanics followed silently, their heavy boots echoing ominously against the concrete floor. Alone again, I locked the garage, door behind them, and sank onto a stool, my mind racing. Whatever Vince was involved in, it went deeper than I could have imagined, and somehow I'd stumbled right into the middle of it. Now, the only choice left was whether to run or fight, but either way, I knew one thing for sure. Trusting anyone here would be a fatal mistake. Fiat started with a promotion, or at least that's what they called it. After 3 years in the auditing department, I was transferred to corporate finance, a move that sounded prestigious, but felt more like being handed a ticking time bomb. My new office had been vacated just weeks before by Gregory Hale, my predecessor, whose name now carried an infamous weight within the company. Arrested for embezzling over $500,000, Hale had gone from rising star to cautionary tale overnight. The details were murky. Rumors swirled about offshore accounts, falsified invoices, and late-night transfers. But one thing was clear. No one wanted to talk about him. On my first day, as I sifted through the files left behind on my desk, I couldn't help but feel uneasy. Everything seemed meticulously organized, too perfect, almost staged. Financial. Reports were neatly stacked, expense logs double-checked, and digital records scrubbed clean. At first glance, there was nothing incriminating, yet something gnawed at me. Why would someone so careful leave such a pristine paper trail, if not to cover their tracks? And why did certain transactions, flagged innocuously as miscellaneous expenses, seem to recur every month without explanation? Then came the moment that sent chills down my spine. Buried deep in an archived folder, I found a handwritten note tucked inside an old ledger. It read simply, "If you're reading this, you're next." There was no signature, no date, just those 6 chilling words scrawled in jagged handwriting. Suddenly, the quiet hum of the office felt heavier, the walls closer. Whoever Gregory Hale was working with or running from, they weren't done yet. And judging by the way some of my colleagues glanced at me during meetings, I began to wonder how close to home the truth might hit. At first, I tried to dismiss the note as a cruel prank or leftover debris from Hale's downfall, but the more I dug into the financial records, the harder it became to ignore the inconsistencies. Certain transactions, always rounded to the nearest thousand and labeled vaguely as consulting fees or vendor reimbursements, didn't match any legitimate invoices in our system. When I cross-referenced them with internal communications, I discovered emails between Hale and someone using the alias Raven. The messages were cryptic, filled with phrases like, "Phase 2 is ready," and "keep the ledger clean until then." Whoever Raven was, they weren't just complicit, they were orchestrating everything. What worried me most wasn't the evidence itself, but how easily accessible it seemed. If these breadcrumbs had been left behind for me to find, it meant one of two things. Either whoever was involved wanted me to know what Hale had done, or they were testing me. That thought kept me awake at night, staring at the ceiling while replaying every interaction I'd had since joining the department. One name kept surfacing in my mind: Elena Vega, the senior analyst who sat across from me. She was always friendly, offering help with complex reports or inviting me to lunch. But lately, her questions had taken on a sharper tone. "How's the transition going?" she'd ask, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. "Anything unusual pop up in the files?" Each inquiry felt less like curiosity and more like probing. I decided to test Elena subtly, dropping vague comments during lunch about finding oddities in the older accounts. Her reaction was immediate and telling. For a split second, her polished demeanor cracked, revealing something colder beneath. "Oddities," she repeated, her fork pausing midair. "Like what?" The casual tone didn't fool me. Her eyes darted toward the door as if checking for eavesdroppers. I shrugged it off, pretending it was nothing serious. "Just some outdated vendor info," I lied, watching her carefully. She forced a laugh, brushing it aside, but the tension lingered like static electricity. That evening, as I packed up to leave, I noticed something unsettling on my desk. A printed email from the archive folder, the same one between Hale and Raven. Someone had slipped it under my keyboard while I wasn't looking. At the bottom of the page, someone had scrawled a new message in red ink. "Ask too many questions and you'll end up like him." My hands trembled as I stared at the words. Whoever was behind this knew exactly where I worked, when I left, and how far they could push before I broke. Worse still, they were sending a clear message. I wasn't safe, not here, not anywhere. As much as I wanted to walk away, I couldn't shake the feeling that uncovering the truth might be the only way to protect myself. But who could I trust? And how deep did this conspiracy go? The next morning, I arrived at the office early, determined to gather more evidence without drawing attention. I brought in a personal laptop, using it to discreetly back up every suspicious file I could find. As I worked, paranoia gnawed at me. Every sound outside my office felt like footsteps. Every shadow seemed deliberate. When Elena knocked on my doorframe around mid-morning, I nearly jumped out of my skin. "Mind if I borrow those Q3 reports?" she asked sweetly, gesturing toward my desk. Her eyes flicked briefly to the corner of the room where I'd hidden my laptop. My heart raced, but I nodded and handed her the files, forcing a smile. "Sure thing," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She lingered for a moment too long before leaving, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew exactly what I was doing. By the end of the week, I realized I had two choices: expose the scheme or walk away and hope they left me alone. But walking away didn't feel like an option anymore, not when I knew someone close to me was involved. That night, after everyone else had gone home, I stayed late again, poring over the data one last time. Then, as I reached for my bag to leave, I saw it. A small USB drive placed conspicuously in the center of my desk. On it, a label read, "For your own good." It was both a threat and a lifeline, containing either enough evidence to bring them all down, or enough rope to hang myself. Either way, I knew there was no turning back now. Whoever Raven was, they weren't done playing games, and neither was I.